Hey, Starly here. If you're looking to improve the look of the speedlines in your comics, I'll be going over a few ways on how you can easily do so. And at the end of this video, I'll show you how you can make really cool effects like these, so be sure to stick around so you can use this effect in your own comic as well. Before I jump in, I just want to quickly say I have received a few suggestions for videos and I will try to get to them as soon as I can. I too work full time, so it takes me a bit longer to make new videos, even these short ones, but if you have any more suggestions, please leave a comment. I do read all of the comments and hugely appreciate all of them. I also have a big project I'm currently working on, which will take a bit longer to do, but it will have some really cool stuff in it that I know a lot of you will find really helpful. I already shared a little sneak peek on my Discord server, link in the description if you'd like to see more about that. I also share art tips and resources there for anyone interested in improving their art. I also was sick recently, so my voice might sound like crap, but I didn't want to delay a new video any further. Let's get into the topic here. Speedlines are a hugely important asset for showing movement, action, and emotions in comics, which are a static medium. The line is such a powerful tool because it naturally draws the eye in and forces it to point in a direction. So at the end of this point will be whatever we want to emphasize. There are some variations to speedlines too. You can have speedlines that start at the edge of the panels, speedlines that start inside so you can see the entire line, speedlines used for thought bubbles, speedlines used for dramatic effect. There are speedlines that show action, and speedlines made up of circles or other shapes. It's rarely necessary to do more than a standard speedline, but if you are inclined to be creative, go for it. But be sure to try and match the feeling of the scene you're drawing. For example, I wouldn't use a cute heart effect for a serious battle scene, but maybe it does work in a magical girl comic where the character attacks with hearts. There isn't a right or wrong answer here, it's completely up to you. It is of course subjective if you think the speedlines will enhance the panel or not, but there are times when they are generally used. If I want to show a character is shocked, or having an outburst of strong emotions, then speedlines may help emphasize that emotion. If you have a big action sequence, then it's very likely a lot of speedlines will be used here since there will be a lot of movement and the speedlines will help a lot with showing that movement. Of course, you shouldn't completely rely on the speedlines to show the movement. Also be sure to study anatomy and composition and do gesture drawing exercises since you will need a combination of these tools to produce good action panels. I'll be going over how to make speedlines both with traditional pen and ink and also digital ink. So let's start with traditional pen and ink. Pen and ink is naturally more time consuming, manual, and tricky to do, but it does yield a beautiful end result when it's done well. The trickiest part is not smudging the ink, and when I use pen and ink, this would happen a lot. Try not to freak out if it does happen, because it can be fixed later. If you're using a dip pen, then you will want to make sure your ruler is raised off the surface of the paper just a little bit. To do this, add some tape to the bottom of the ruler. You may need to add a few layers depending on the thickness of the tape you are using. I have found this doesn't completely resolve the issue of smudging, but it definitely helps. Make sure you don't put too much ink on the nib. This means you'll run out of ink faster and will have to dip more, but it will save time with not having to clean up smudges. When you draw the line, try not to leave the pen nib touching the ruler for too long and draw quickly, as this will also help prevent smudging. If you do smudge, you can use whiteout or edit it later on the computer after scanning it in. Draw a dot or an X for the vanishing point and carefully line up your ruler to the dot. Since I'm right-handed, I gradually move the ruler to the left as I finish a line. When you draw the line, try not to leave the pen nib touching the ruler for too long and draw quickly as this will also help prevent smudging. If you do smudge, you can use whiteout or edit it later on the computer after scanning it in. In this video, I first use a round pen, then a G pen, and then a marker pen. It's been a while since I've done this, so a few of my lines came out uneven, but if this happens, you can just carefully redraw over them. The marker pen became my preferred method of doing straight lines since it very rarely will smudge. The marker pen does not look as nice as the dip pen, but it won't smudge unless it isn't completely dry. I ended up using marker pens for all my straight lines later on in my comic, since I did kill off smudges with the pen and ink. Here's an example where I used whiteout to fix a smudge. It's okay if it isn't perfect because it can be cleaned up after scanning. To fix a smudge after scanning, you can just draw whiteout over it. If your comic is in color, this may be a bit more difficult, but you can also use the clone stamp tool to help clean it up. Now for digital speedlines, Clip Studio Paint has made this incredibly easy for us. If you don't use Clip Studio Paint, then there are probably ways your program of choice can make them too. Or you can just download some pre-made speedlines from somewhere. I'll leave a link to a site where you can download some comic tones and speedlines. There are a couple ways to make speedlines in Clip Studio Paint. The first is by going to the Figure tool. In here we have streamlines and saturated lines. Streamlines are straight, horizontal, or vertical lines, and you can see CSP comes with a few options here, so you can create different atmospheres using these lines. They even have a rain option here, so you can easily create a rain effect. And you can change the angle on it too, so it can become more intense. The way you use these is the same as I mentioned in my How to Make Vectors video series using the spline method. You can check out that video series by clicking the link I'll leave at the top corner over here. So basically what you do is you just click where you want the line to start, click again for where you want the line to curve, and then double click to finish the line. And this will represent the middle of the group of lines. Don't worry if it's not perfect, because then you can go to the operation tool and adjust the line. If you don't see some of these tools in the properties box here, then make sure to click the wrench icon and you can add them from here. The next option is the saturated line. These are the speedlines that converge to a single point, and again, CSP has a few different options for different types. So let's start with the first one and work our way down. For the scattered saturated line, this one is probably the most commonly used, so I'll go into more detail about it. You create it by dragging out a circle. Now, this default option honestly doesn't look very good. There isn't much variation of the lines, they're all grouped together, there's a lot of negative space, but luckily we can easily make adjustments to this. To do so, you can again go to the operation tool. So here we can do things like changing the main color. After color, next we have gap of line angle and gap of line distance. And this will be the spacing between the various lines. And so if we bring this up higher, there will be a much larger gap here. If we bring it down lower, there will be a much smaller gap, which will also create many more lines. We can also change this to distance, and it has subtle variations to it. You can also turn on disarray, and this will also create more variations. If you bring it down, there will be less, and if you bring it up, there will be more. The next option is the grouping option, and this is how many lines are in one group. So we can turn this up and there will be much bigger groups, or we can turn it down to have much smaller groups. And again, we have disarray available, so that can create more variations of groups. We can also adjust the gap here, so it can be bigger between groups or lesser between groups. Next, we can also adjust the length of the line, so we can make it really small or really big and it takes up the entire page. And again, we can turn on disarray here, so then there will be more variation. And that can sometimes create a really cool effect. Next is gap from reference point, and this will be how far away the lines are from the reference point. So if we turn this up, they will go in more, and you'll notice that we might now see the ends of them sticking out, or we can make this smaller, and now there's less variation inside here, but we don't see them cut off. So I usually stick with a number about in the middle. And you can also turn on uneven reference position, so this will create even more variation. There are a lot of options here, so you just have to play around with them to get a result that you like. And next we also have brush size, so we can change the look of our brush as well. We can also change the brush shape here, so I will zoom in so we can see it a little more. And we can change it to something softer, which works well for color pages. This is the pen I like to use for my black and white pages. It has a very crisp edge to it. And now we have our finished lines here, and I think they look pretty good. Next we have the dark saturated line curve. The curve means that we are creating it by using a curve. And we do this using the spline method. It creates these nice thick lines, but it is a bit difficult to control. It will take some practice to get used to it, which is why I don't prefer this tool, but it may work for you in your workflow. And next we have the dense saturated line. And this one is again created by using a circle. And this one, again, you will have to play around with the settings a lot to get it exactly as you would like it to be. So one thing to keep in mind when you're adjusting these settings is you do not want the lines to converge at the vanishing point. You want to make sure that there is a gap here. If the lines are touching, it will sometimes become confusing and it may take the reader out of the action. So you do want to make sure there is enough space here. The next option we have is brightness, and this is a pretty fun one because it looks like a star burst, so it can come in handy for some really fun effects. And lastly, we have one that's a bit similar to brightness, which is called burst. And we can create it using a circle, and it creates an explosion effect that looks really cool. I actually use this one a lot early on in my comic for explosions. Overall though, I just find these are difficult to control and I end up spending more time adjusting them than I would drawing them, and that's why I prefer this next method, which is just manually drawing them. This allows me the most control, so I can make the effects look exactly as I'd like them to. First, create a new vector layer. We want to use a vector layer instead of a raster layer because this will give us more control over the lines. Next, let's go to ruler and special ruler and select radial line from the menu here. Now just click on the area of the panel you most want to emphasize. This will be the point where all of the lines converge. It has created a vanishing point for us. Make sure your snap to special ruler is turned on. Now you go to your preferred brush and start drawing your lines. And you can use any brush so you can create infinitely cool effects. If your comic is in color, you can go to the operation tool, select all of the lines, and then change the color. To erase any of the overlapping areas, be sure to use a mask, so you can easily turn this on and off as you'd like to make adjustments without erasing any of the artwork. It's now time for some quick tips as we can push our speedlines a bit further. We can easily add a gradient effect to the speedlines. First, create a new raster layer and make sure your expression color is in color if it's not by default. Then go to gradient and select a gradient you'd like to use. Or you can create a new gradient by copying the current one and then making adjustments to it. For the shape, there is straight line, circle, or ellipse. I'm going to use the circle one for this example. And now I'm going to draw out the gradient. Now go to your layers panel and click on the clip to layer below button. And it's done. Now we've got some really pretty effects. Sometimes, especially with black and white comics, you may notice the speedlines don't show up well against the dark areas. What if our panel has a lot of black in it and the black speedlines are not showing up at all? Luckily, we can easily resolve this issue and also add another bit of effect to the speedlines. First, duplicate the layer for the speedlines. Select the layer underneath the one that you just created. And now make sure you're on the Operation Object tool and select all of the lines. Also, if you're on a vector layer and end up selecting vectors that are on different layers, then you can fix that by going to Operation of Transparent Part and making sure Switch to a different layer is not checked on. Now you will select only from the layer you are currently on. Now change the main color to white and click OK. Next, I'll rotate this just a little bit. You only need to do this a very little bit since we just want it to line up with the edges. When you zoom in, you may notice it isn't perfect, so you can then manually adjust the lines so they do line up a bit better. We can also make speedlines that curve around. I use this technique a lot in my one-shot comic, Creativerse. I'll leave a link to it in the description so you can check out all the different effects I used. First, create a vector layer. Next, go to Ruler, then Special Ruler. So this is where we found radial line before, and now we're going to select Parallel Curve. And you can see there are the usual different options for creating the curve, so you can play around with these and what works best for you in your scene. For this example, I'm going to use the quadratic Bezier. Now I'll create a line here by clicking once where I want the line to start, and then a second click for where I want it to curve, and I will pull out the line. And then I'll do a double click for where I want it to end. Make sure your Snap to Special Ruler button up here is turned on. Then you can go to your pen tool of choice and you can draw a bunch of fun curved lines like this. And with this, you'll be able to create infinite really cool effects. Another option I like to use is the radial curve option. We can make the radial curve the same way we just made the parallel curve. So we click once, pull out and click where we want it to curve, and then we can keep dragging like this and double click when we are satisfied with it. Now this time you'll notice the first point we made is a vanishing point. This will be where the lines originate from, and they will curve around the line we created. This is such a cool and powerful effect. Use it wisely to bring your comic to the next level. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment or join us on Discord. We're still a very small community there that we're just starting to build up, so we would love to have others join us who are looking to improve their art. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't yet, because I do have tons of more video ideas that will help you grow your art, and it will be really huge in helping to support making these videos. Also, share the video if you have any friends who make comics or are thinking about making comics and would benefit from these videos. May our journey from making cool speedlines be easy and fun.